Hello, listeners. On the weekend between Ascension and Pentecost, a weekend really of expectation and of relatively little activity. I'm spending my relative lack of activity in Prague. And it's lack of activity because I am the victim of an accident, a fairly minor accident, but left me unable to walk round the old town with the colleagues I have with me in Prague from an association to do with wood and furniture manufacture, of which I am a member. It's called Wood Aimer, if ever you're interested in looking that up. And we've had a conference. We're halfway through the conference as I speak, talking about the hope of expanding the use of wood in housing and in furniture. It turns out that the Slovaks know a lot about building houses in wood, but the Czechs a lot less because they still have rules which favour brick buildings, and this may change in the coming months if the people in this university, which is called the University of Life Sciences in Prague, if the people here get their way to influence the regulations in Czechia. I'm actually away from Geneva for a total of about 9 days this time, partly because of this conference and partly because last weekend I attended an event which takes place every 5 years, and it was in fact a readers' conference. In case you don't know, I am a licensed reader or lay reader of the Anglican Church, and there are, well, in the order of 100, maybe 130 readers licensed by the bishop throughout Europe, the Diocese of Europe, and we get together once every 5 years in a building in Cologne called Cardinal Schulte House, which happens to have a history because it was used by the Gestapo during the Second World War. That's well behind us, I'm glad to say, and we had a good and inspirational meeting. But now I'm talking about wood and the economy and all those things which I usually speak to you about in terms of the events, the political and economic events of the week. Apparently there's a lot going on in Scotland in terms of the general election, with the Conservative Party expected to make a bit of a comeback. Labour apparently has no chance whatsoever, but the Tories may get a few seats back from what has been a massive victory in the past few years of the Scottish National Party. In fact, even I detected when I was in Scotland a fortnight ago that the SNP is not creating quite so much enthusiasm about independence as it once did, and Nicola is perceived rather as a pain. Why doesn't he just shut up and let us get on with things? But to put this whole Scottish question into some sort of perspective, I am reading, I'm well over halfway through now, a book by Neil Oliver. Those of you who ever watch the UK television will know that he did a series called The History of Scotland, and he's also done one on coasts, and he's got a clear but strong Scottish accent and very long hair. And as he wanders round, looking rather windswept with his long hair, he tells a fascinating story of the history of our countries, our islands in Great Britain. And you end up feeling, well, these Scots, they've had an awful lot of trouble with the English. They call them the Old Enemy, old spelt the Scottish way, A-U-L-D. But my goodness, they fought so much among themselves, they didn't need England for an enemy. That was my conclusion after watching his series, and it's an observation which stands the test of time in terms of reading this book. And I've got to the point where James VI of Scotland became James I of England. The Scots weren't happy about that either. And, well, the plot unravels slowly, and I can well understand why Scotland has to be treated as a distinct nation. That's not the same thing as saying economic independence, and I do hope they don't vote for that. I hope they stay with the United Kingdom, but that all their national characteristics and culture and language remain and become stronger. Who remember a bit of Roman history when you were at school will have heard of the Picts. They were the great enemy of the Romans and basically prevented the Romans going north into Scotland. They had a few battles and didn't do very well with them. There is some explanation about the Picts linking it to the Hadrian's Wall, which wasn't really the end of the Roman Empire in Britain, but it was at least an attempt to stop the Picts coming south and attacking the Romans. And so what happened to the Picts? And I've learned the answer of that from the first pages of my book by Neil Oliver. It turns out that by then, as we get into the medieval period, the Vikings, particularly Norwegian Vikings, had occupied a lot of Scotland, and they'd gone in via the Western Isles and actually seemed to have learned the Gaelic language rather than still speaking Norwegian. And they decided to make war against the Picts and basically wiped out all the men. And they have analysed the DNA of the surviving people in Scotland, discovered that the men have gone and the women were allowed to survive under the Vikings, but they all learned to speak Gaelic. And so the Pict language and culture pretty well disappeared from the face of the earth. Really a case of early ethnic cleansing, but a very, quote, successful one, close quote, because there's nothing left. They never wrote their language down, whereas the Gaels did, and so we are lost, the Picts are lost to us in history. I started talking to you about the sense of waiting between Ascension and Pentecost, and there's that similar sense of waiting as we approach the United Kingdom general election, which will certainly make a difference to the Brexit negotiations. I'm absolutely not in favour of Brexit, but given that it's going to happen anyway, and apparently there's no reversing it, then I would wish the UK government to have as strong a position as possible. There have been some slanging matches recently between representatives of the European Union and the UK government, but there's also news, even as I speak to you, that there is a gentle move towards seeking a compromise, which of course both sides are going to have to do if they're not to shoot themselves respectively in their own feet. Part of the sense of wait and see, do nothing much, has come out of both the European Central Bank and the UK Central Bank, and also over the Atlantic with the Fed. None of them have increased or decreased their overnight rates, the bank rates, if you like, and that's because it is by no means clear which way the economies are going. My own view, as you know, is that the US economy is not in a strong position, and that it's even possible to say that over in Europe, they have taken measures which the US should have taken but haven't taken, and the result is that now the Trump recovery, which is based entirely on hope rather than reality, is coming to an end. And we had, in fact, what they call a massive peak in the volatility of markets a few days back, after which things have gone calm again. Volatility can be the beginning of a massive drop, but it can also be a false alert. I think the likelihood of a massive drop is still quite high, and I've been singing that song for so many months, it must be difficult for you to even take me seriously on it. But there is every sign that the market is at its top, and that the only type of investment you should make now is either get out of stocks altogether or buy something which you really think is very, very solid indeed. Not that I particularly recommend individuals should ever pick their own stocks, not anymore. It's getting too complex, and I think the approach of going to either a mutual fund or, in my mind, better still, an exchange traded fund is a better way to try and participate in the stock market. I shall speak to you again next week where I hope more news happens, so there's something to comment on. But digging back into history, I hope by next week to have understood something else about Scotland, which is why Scots, the Scottish version of English, which was spoken by James VI of Scotland and imposed on the country, and which lived a long time because I think Robbie Burns wrote his poetry in Scots. What happened to it? They all speak regular English now north of the border, and I'd like to know why.